it tells almost the same story as the movie. It introduces Jack O'Neill, right, at his house, and it introduces Jack O'Neill with an airman coming up, knocking on the door, paralleling the movie quite a bit, because in the movie, he knocks on the door, and Jack O'Neill is just a looking longingly at that pistol, wonder if he's going to eat the business end of it. But in this one, this is after the adventure in the movie, and so Jack O'Neill is up on the roof, gazing at the stars, wondering which direction the battle fleet's going to come from, right? Like, still kind of a dark place, but has purpose now, you know?
Yep.
Many of the beats of Children of the Gods are so similar, because when he gets called back into the Stargate program, much like he did in the movie, they're about to just shoot a nuke through the wormhole and say, fuck it. In the movie, Jack O'Neill is like, hey, why don't you let me go hit the button and kill myself and everyone around me on the other side? But in this one, Jack O'Neill is like, hey, man, maybe we don't murder people because there's people over there.
Yeah.
You know, and
well, I think one of the greatest things about Jack's arc, at least in between the movie and maybe the first season especially, is that it very much embodies something that, funnily enough, I've seen also in some like posts and like actually like bits of stand-up, as a matter of fact, over the last couple of days, where it's like, you know, basically the gist of it is that this trope is that, you know, it's easy to say you'll die for someone or something. It's hard to live for someone or so. You know, and the difference being that, you know, in the context of Stargate, the movie, Jack O'Neill, as you said, is willing to kill himself to complete this mission. But it's not until he gets a reason to live for the mission, which is when he realizes, oh, there's a threat out there that I might have to be around for in the future. And there's like people who might still rely on me, and people who still care about me. And I don't need to just destroy myself in this, you know, hopeless, forlorn, self-destructive.
You're right. It's because living for something takes like actual work. Right. And you're dying, you know, heroically takes work. Sure. I've never done it, so I can't really speak to it. But
it's not as much work, if it may be, because or maybe like, it's a different kind of work, because you're basically you dying heroically for a cause or to save some life or multiple lives or what have you. Your problems are over when the mission's over, you know.
Exactly.
You're dead. But when you have to live for something, it's kind of goes like that. It's like that joke kind of says in a flippant way, you know, it can be like dying slowly. Living for something, you might have decades to try and build something and cultivate it and safeguard it and nurture it. And it might take every ounce of effort and strength you have in your body, and it might break you. And a lot of people aren't ready for that. In fact, most people, I would say, are probably not really ready to take on that kind of responsibility.
I mean, that's the difference between, you know, dating a pretty girl for a weekend and getting married.
Yeah.
You know,
basically, like, yeah.
Dating a pretty girl for a weekend's fun for like a weekend. You know, it's a real shallow experience. You know, you'll probably forget her name. But like when you're married, you know, it's you see all of the parts of the person that they don't show anyone else, like the emotional stuff. Who am I really? And then that person accepts you for all your weird shit, and you accept them for all their weird shit. And then you just say, hey, we're sticking this out together. We're going to build a life together no matter what. And, you know, anybody who's listening has been married will know sometimes that no matter what takes a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Because you got to be like, hey, there's nothing more important than the no matter what. That's the most important thing. And much to your point, living for something, living for someone is all the world, right? And after Jack O'Neill stops the nuke from going over, they send a team out to Abydos. But then they get over there, and Daniel Jackson's still over there with his wife, who is way out of his league. So like, I just want to be like, good for you, bud. Like, well done. And yes, technically she was gift, and that's a little bit human trafficking, but also, you know, it was war, it's aliens, it's complicated. I get it, right?
It's a complex cultural thing.
It's a complex cultural thing. It all works out for the end. Well, not for her, but for everyone else.
But for different reasons. For different reasons, it's not. It doesn't work. It doesn't work out for her, not because of her being married to Daniel Jackson, but because the Gould are universal dickheads.
Yeah, and when
Apophis is an asshole who refuses to die. Get to that.
Is the king of the night, where Ra was like the king of the day in Egyptian mythology. And as the 2-hour pilot unfolds, you see more and more like, there's a line I like where Daniel Jackson says they're living it out. Like there's this whole
straight out of the Book of the Dead. They're living it out.
Yeah. And Skara makes an appearance. Now, I think that's the same kid from the movie.
Yep.
But
There's only two actors who are the same between the movie and the TV show, and it's Skara and Skara's dad, who's also Share's dad.
Yeah.
What's the kid? I can't remember the kid's name, but the guy's name is Eric Avari, and he's played bit roles in a bunch of different things. He was in The Mummy. He was in the very beginning of Independence Day as the SETI station chief who gets woken up to hear the message from these saucers coming in. It hits his head on the ceiling when he stands up too quick.
See, that's the kind of career I'd want, where you're making stuff, you're a part of something big, but I don't know. There's all that pressure being the spotlight guy.
Mm-hmm.
What with this episode, what's the thing that stands out with you the most?
Looking at it again, it strikes me how well constructed this is as a pilot episode.
Oh, it's tight as a drum.
Because it hits so many. You're right. It hits so many good beats, and it hits them when it needs to, how it needs to, and it sells itself as a pilot. Arguably the follow-up episode, which again technically it's the third episode, if depending on what service you're looking at, because I've seen the first 2-parter episode split up into 2. I've seen it as 1. It doesn't really matter. The next one, the one with The Enemy Within, I think it's called, the one with the Gould, where we deal with the consequences of the Gould getting inside Kowalski.
Yeah,
those 3 episodes technically can go together as like a 3-part pilot almost, because by the end of the third one, which I just watched last night with my dad because we wanted something to watch, you have the foursome together. You have Teal'c on SG-1. They go through the Stargate for the first time, but definitely Children of the Gods is the original pilot made for Showtime. I want to say it hits so many good beats. It's tight. It's well written. It's well acted. There's parts that could be better, but that's the case with any. You take any sci-fi show, especially early in its lifespan. There's going to be growing pains. Star Trek: Next Generation is often considered one of the greatest Star Treks, and you look at its first season. There's lots of rough stuff.
Yeah,
there's a lot of rough stuff in that first season.
Speaking of that, and we'll get a brief tangent. I'm kind of constructing in my head an article about why I don't like Jean-Luc Picard.
Yeah,
as a military officer. Goddamn, I hear him say he does stuff, and I hear him say stuff, and I'm like, why are you you should be I don't know, in charge of the juice bar at the lunar dock or something.
Well, I think that actually based on the conversation we had, which you can detail here obviously if you want, for the sake of the readers, but based on the conversation we had about how Jean-Luc Picard kind of falls short as a great captain because he's not willing to make to take the steps that sometimes need to be taken if you're going to be a great leader. And I think that goes back to what we talked about in terms of, the difference between dying for a cause and living for a cause. Jean-Luc Picard, like the example you used, was he wasn't willing to live with the guilt. I don't know, whatever. He wasn't willing to live with the feeling that it would have given him to wipe out the board, because for some reason he was such a believer in the admittedly, noble, but maybe perhaps misguided, but he's such a believer in the goals of Starfleet and the Prime Directive and all those sorts of things that he's not willing to sacrifice an entire species even if that species is committing genocide against billions of other species, possibly. It's basically which in a sense it boils down to the one of the most classic of Star Wars lessons. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Are we willing to count off the Borg and wipe them out to safeguard the rest of the galaxy? And John Luke Picard said, no, I'm not willing to do that, because as bad as they may be, they're still alive. And I think that touches on on kind of something we talked about. He's not willing to live with that. He could die fighting the Borg, as we can definitely see in First Contact, where he'd be willing to sacrifice himself in the fight against the Borg, but for some reason he's not willing to see them be destroyed, even if he has the means within his grasp to do it, because he's not willing to live with that. Again, I don't know if guilt or shame or whatever emotion you want to use, whatever emotional term you want to use is the correct one, but he would rather live with the horror of knowing they exist than with the guilt of knowing that he wiped them out and committed genocide for some reason.
I don't know. I'd feel more guilty if people died after a thing happened that I could have stopped.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly right. It's like a question. If you had a time machine, would you go back in time and kill baby Hitler?
It's the same. I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Same thought crossed my head. You know who wouldn't hesitate pulling that trigger on the Borg? Jack O'Neill.
Exactly. Because Jack O'Neill friggin' says as much. In the episode, you remember I think it was like season 6? It was just season 6, because that's the one where Daniel is, which we'll get to, I'm sure. Daniel says as much. He's like, if you had, because what is it? Daniel, it's the episode where Ball has captured Jack because Jack had the Toker in him, and Jack was trying to bust the Toker's friend out of prison or something, or bust the Toker out of Ball's facility, and Ball captures him and he's torturing him. He's torturing him to death over and over again, and using the sarcophagus to resurrect him. And Daniel comes to him like an astral form or whatever, and says, as an ascended being, and says, "Hey, I can get you out of this, but you have to consent to be ascended and to lose your touch with the lower plane." And Jack says, "No, I can't do it, because I would be tempted. I would not only be tempted to, I would want to use my power to right wrongs down here on the ground." And there's a very good exchange. It's actually some very fine acting between Michael Shanks and Richard Dean Anderson, where Michael Shanks is like, "You're a better man than that, Jack." And Jack actually has an outburst and says, "That's where you're wrong." Because he knows what kind of person he is. He knows what he has done. He knows that for the 10 to 20 years before he joined the Stargate program, he was in the friggin' covert service of JSOC or whatever, and was killing people for the United States government. He doesn't have compunctions against. Yeah, he was stacking bodies. He does not have compunctions against doing the necessary evils, if you even want to call it that, for the sake of the greater good, or what he considers to be the greater good. And he makes that clear several other times. That's one of the things that makes him such a good lead character for the show, is that he has the very unwavering moral compass, and he's not afraid to tell someone to stick it if they get in the way of that moral compass.
The thing I liked about Children of the Gods was where, like you were saying, how it's tight as a drum, how it all just works. None of it's wasted, right? Mm-hmm. And so Daniel Jackson's wife, Shari, I think I'd say her name.
Shari, yep.
Yeah, there you go. And she's captured by a ghoul. She gets a worm put in her belly, and so she gets taken over by an alien. And so that's Daniel Jackson's motivation to run out into the universe. And then Skara, who's Daniel Jackson's brother-in-law, and kind of the surrogate son for Jack O'Neill, gets captured as well. And then both of them are, captured by the enemy. And so then you get this cool shot at the end of Children of the Gods where they're both like, "Oh," he's like, "My wife's gone." And then Jack O'Neill's like, "Yeah, so is my surrogate son." And then Dan and Jack's like, "What are we going to do?" And then Jack O'Neill says, "We're going to get him." And I like how out of everything else, it also sets those two guys up with almost identical character motivations. but you get to see the differences in their character, but given how they act in service of those motivations. Like you and me, two rapidly different guys. If we both had wives and they both got captured, we'd probably handle it differently because we're two different guys, right? Same character motivation, two different characters bouncing against it. I like Kowalski. Kowalski being Jack O'Neill's best friend, one of the guys that was from the movie, and is the leader of SG-2. And if that episode ends with a worm that goes in his ear, and then he's the enemy within, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Which I think is the episode or the title of episode 2 or 3, however you're counting it.
Yep.
Was there anything with Children of the Gods that, if you had to nitpick?
You know, if I had to nitpick, I would probably, you know, I don't know, because I'd have to think on that, because it does so much right, that the stuff, that the little things like, you know, because obviously, well, even if we wanted to nitpick like its production value, for example, it has pretty good production value for what it is. It's a late 90s sci-fi show, originally from Showtime, eventually moved to Sci-Fi Channel. It actually has pretty good production values even for the first season, because it actually was, you know, they spent some money to try and sell a series by making this good pilot episode. So, you know, whereas a lot of those shows from back then, and if anything, they can kind of get away with cutting corners, because it's set mostly on Earth or on other planets. You know, you look at shows like Babylon 5, and I'm not bad mouthing Babylon 5 or any of those, because they've got their own place in the annals of sci-fi history. But you look at like the early seasons, especially, you can tell that the budget was maybe not there yet, or the technology was maybe not there yet, because and it's easy to tell, because at least half the show takes place, or like even just B-roll or whatever, takes place in space, whether it's around the space station itself or with the ships flying to and from the space station or whatever. And that sort of effects work was maybe not the best in the mid 90s when the show started airing, and the technology wasn't really there. So
with Babylon 5, it's like it began in 93, right?
Yeah.
And it was actually the first live action TV show to incorporate that level of computer generated graphics on a weekly basis. And it had like half the budget of DS9.
Yeah.
And yeah, now it looks like a PlayStation 2 cutscene, you know, like the graphics. And I know the stuff you're sending me that you're doing in Blender looks better than Babylon 5 back then, but you know, I digress. You're saying.
No, it's, you know, you're right, because that's the thing is, but it's we have to remember that when it came out, it was cutting edge. Yeah. Because you mentioned, oh, it looks like PlayStation 2 cutscenes. Well, you know, we like to joke about how, oh, well, we all have nostalgia goggles about these old video games, but when Halo, you know, I could probably use Halo as an example because I'm a Halo head. When the original Halo came out in late 2001, it was cutting edge. And the cutscenes were beautiful to people. You know, we may look back on it now, almost 22 years later, or going on 22 years later, and think, oh, well, that's so low tech, it looks so bad. But when it came out, that's the best thing people knew. So they thought it looked cool.
Speaking of low tech, at the climactic battle of Children of the Gods, and this is only because I've watched a lot of behind the scenes documentaries on model work and stuff. So you've got all, you know, SG-1s in the wood line, and then there's all these refugees they're trying to get to the Stargate. And then the Jaffa battleships are flying in, but then it just cuts to a view right below the battleships, and you see just nothing but like white lines behind it. And I'm like, oh, this is the model work part. And then the battleship shoots at them, and then I'm like, oh, this is kind of like Power Rangers back in the day, right?
Yep.
And then, it's 1997. It's a TV show. It's fine. I am thoroughly enjoying this SG-1 rewatch, honestly, more than I thought I would. Not that I didn't think I would, but I forgot just how fucking good this show is.
I don't think Stargate SG-1 struggles all that much in the first season. It kind of finds its footing early on and kind of hits the ground running.